Hi, this time I'm going to talk about The Garden of Words. The Garden of Words is a story created by Makoto Shinkai. He is a somewhat recent, very talented cinematographer, screenwriter that has created or produced some of the best video animations. They are pretty good, technically speaking, but what makes them stand out so much is that he's quite able to communicate stories of sadness and joy at the same time. There are many powerful messages in his works, but they all have that sweet and sour quality to them. Now, in this video, I am going to talk about spoilers of the Garden of Words. But funny thing is, I think that you can actually enjoy the Garden of Words even though you know what's going to happen in a general sense. I actually read some spoilers about the video before I watched it, because I had seen other works, other films and series of Makoto Shinkai, and I kinda like them. That is, I recognize them as good stories, as perhaps even masterpieces, but at the same time I didn't like that they were somewhat quite tragic, a bit more tragic than happy. And although you can appreciate such tragedies and dramas, I always like it when things are a bit more positive. So as I was saying, I recognize that they are technically and perhaps emotionally fulfilling, but I wasn't too happy about them. However, I was really pleased with the Garden of Words, and I actually didn't want to spend my time thinking about and watching this video, even though it's quite short, 45 minutes long if I'm not mistaken. So that's the reason why I started reading a few of the spoilers, and even though I knew some of the events and things that would happen beforehand, I still enjoyed this quite a bit. This is one of my favorite original video animations. And I should also mention that, well, in the case of anime, people have different interpretations. Because anime is so, how would you say, eclectic or holistic in its approach, there are many ways to look at a single anime video or series. So my interpretation and thoughts on the Garden of Words could differ quite radically from the views and opinions of others, so keep that in mind. And I am also going to talk a bit about, I guess you could call it my philosophy when it comes to life and love. And again, this is just my interpretation and the way I look at things through the Garden of Words, so keep that into consideration. Now, let's talk about the technical details of the Garden of Words. I'm going to put a link to the trailer below. I recommend that you watch that trailer before you continue watching this video. And as you will notice in that trailer, the series is the video animation is quite epic. This is probably the best I've seen when it comes to animation. Something that I really like of the Garden of Words is that there is a lot of green. You will see that contours or delineations of the characters with this like a green glow to them, or a green glare perhaps you could say, and it expresses a lot of life and vibrancy. And there is a lot of the theme of rain is quite powerful. Rain, this is one of the few videos or stories when I've seen rain representing something other than being gloomy or sad or tragic. Here, rain is actually a positive thing. Each drop of water represents a small glimmer of hope, in my opinion. So you're actually, with the characters, you are actually looking forward to seeing everything covered in rain. So I think you could spend quite a bit of time talking about all of the beautiful details of the video. So let's just focus on that this is it expresses a lot of life and love through the colors, through the reflections of the drops of water, and how small puddles form around different places, and it seems like the entire world transforms. Perhaps I will touch a bit more on those details as I go into this video. And the voice acting is superb. Perhaps just at times, I think that the female lead, just at particular times, could have performed a bit better, but that's just a tiny bit better. But in general, the voice acting is also superb. The music, it fits the scenes and the changes between each scene. It's truly a masterpiece, in my opinion. Now let's talk about the story of the Garden of Words. This is a story of very strange love. It's not that it's not as what you expect of two people meeting each other, but there are so many obstacles, at least as those that are imposed by society and the roles, what is expected of each individual. So the two main characters are basically Takao, a young high school student. I think he was, I don't remember, 16 years old, if I'm not mistaken. 16 or 15. And the female lead, which is Yukino, she is much older. She is 27 years old. So you see how Takao, this young man, is trying to make his way, trying to live a decent life. But here is where I, as I was telling you, I have to talk a bit about my philosophy or the way I look at things. There are also others that have this same perspective of things, but well, here it goes. To me, it feels a lot like this film exposes the sadness of modern education, because you see how Takao wants to become, I guess you could say, a traditional shoemaker, shoe designer. He is very traditional or rustic in the way he approaches shoe design and making. He does his sketches on paper. He builds his own shoes using leather and nails, etc. But he's always like, he feels like school doesn't get him anywhere. There are many dialogues in this video animation that could have several meanings. But I think there is one scene where he's actually at school and he's like, is this actually worth it, or what am I doing here, or something. Like, he wants to focus entirely on his trade. So during rainy morning, he decides to skip school. And he starts walking. He seems a bit bohemian and very mature for his age. Another thing that I think this video exposes is the situation of a child that comes from, or the son of a single mother. That problem that affects society nowadays, the single mom child or children. He lives with his older brother and his mother, but his mother is always going out with her boyfriend, and it seems a bit dysfunctional, in my opinion, that type of family situation. And his older brother, I don't know exactly how responsible he is, but he seems a bit more carefree when compared to this younger protagonist, Takao, who is just, as I was telling you, I don't remember, 15 or 16 years old. And so it's quite surprising that Takao developed a very mature, perhaps even manly personality, because many psychologists would probably agree that when you don't have like a male figure or role model, it's quite difficult for a boy to grow up manly. So Takao, as I was telling you, he seems very mature for his age, and he decides to enjoy the rain, waiting at this, it's sort of like a gazebo of sorts. I don't know the name in Japanese, but he decides to take a stop or rest here while the rain goes on, and he finds that this place is already occupied by Yukino. When he first notices her, and there is a bit of like a joke on the internet, that they say that Takao has like a foot fetish of sorts, because he's a shoe designer, and every time he looks at Yukino, he always starts looking at her feet, and then the camera zooms upwards, so it's kind of like a joke. So he notices her, and she is just a stranger to him, and she also notices him, and they just act quite politely as they wait for the rain to keep going and eventually stop. And even though they try to keep their distance in that initial encounter, you can see that maybe you could say that their bodies say otherwise, because or perhaps a deeper part of themselves tries to reach out. He's making his designs in pencil, and suddenly he drops his eraser, but his eraser drops in the direction of Yukino. So she picks it up and gives it back to him. And she's also like kind of like noticing him, and you're not certain as to how things are going to develop. But before, when the rain is about to end, she gets up and she mentions him. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's a literary tanka quote or something that it basically has to do with the rain. So it's a very cryptic way of asking him or inviting a reply out of him. But he is not familiar with that tanka, so she just smiles and tells him that, and she goes on her way. But you can tell that they are both a bit like, I won't say intrigued, but they found it pleasant that they weren't alone at that moment. So the story most of the time, but it's told by the perspective of Takao, although you will get some insights into the thought process of Yukino. Now, as I was saying, Takao is a student, but let's look a bit into Yukino's background. Yukino is actually a school teacher in that exact same school that Takao is going to. But at times, I am inclined to call her a fragile or gentle soul, but I think that would be somewhat ignorant of me if I were to say that, because later on in the video animation, you see that there was quite a bit of bullying against this school teacher. It's because Yukino is really pretty. So that you don't get the full story, but it seems that there was like this popular couple that is the boyfriend and girlfriend, and the boyfriend kind of liked Yukino. Yeah, it is a bit implied. So the girlfriend, who's kind of like a bitch, she got quite jealous, and she started spreading rumors about that like Yukino was some sort of like a cougar or something. So she got her into trouble, and even though there were a few people on her side, she basically created this, how would you say, environment so that everything was against her, and she had like a breakdown of sorts. So she took some time off going to school, giving classes. And this is another flaw of education, in my opinion. You see these institutions where it's quite easy to put almost everyone against you, even if there are some people on your side. If even the staff or the students are against you, that it's almost suicidal to go to those places. So that's why I wouldn't call her immediately like, oh, she's so fragile, she hasn't built a very strong armor. It's sometimes it gets very hostile in those institutions if you go against the norm, or you have some you think you know how to think for yourself and you are original in your ideas. It kind of reminds me of many years ago. Well, not that many, probably 15 or less. I knew a guy who went to college, and they once presented a problem to them. It was an engineering problem, and the method to solve it was really clumsy, and he and some other students actually found a more efficient and more intelligent way to solve that problem, and the professor actually gave them a really bad what would you say, mark or grade, and so it was quite moronic that because they did things so much better, they were actually punished for it. And you can give many examples of similar things. So again, this modern education, it seems more focused on pushing political ideas and trying to make robots out of the students rather than creating intelligent, creative individuals. So again, you see how Yukino was punished unfairly, and she has this breakdown to the point that she no longer has the ability to enjoy things. She's always carrying around this bag filled with chocolates, and she cannot taste the sweetness of chocolate, and she's also drinking beer. She has a very unhealthy, I guess you could say, lifestyle. And that seems quite nightmarish because, for example, I really love chocolate. Imagine not being able to taste chocolate. That would be quite nightmarish. So you can see how she's suffering on her part. But and as time goes by, because it's sort of like a rainy season, when every time it rains in the morning, Takao and Yukino meet up at that gazebo, or that secret garden of them. It's actually based in a real park in Japan. You can actually go there, and little by little they start to communicate with each other. She's kind of like noticing that, oh, you're a student, and he's telling her, oh, so you're an office lady or what? Why aren't you going to work? And they're kind of like teasing each other. What are they doing there during the morning when he should be studying at school, supposedly, and she should be working, wherever it is. And again, that sense of should is very questionable or arguable probably. Um, so they start to get closer little by little. That's something that I think enhances the atmosphere of love. Very unusual love, as I was telling you. She's kind of like 10 years older than him, because they have almost nothing in common, but there is something that draws them together. And he starts sharing his dreams with her about how he wants to create design and create shoes, specifically women's shoes. You also kind of get like a glimpse into the psychology of that, because there is during a particular encounter he falls asleep while sitting down in that place, and you can see how he's dreaming of when his mother received some very nice shoes. I think it was for a birthday present, and you can see that at that time the father was there. Maybe the father died, or maybe she got divorced. It's not explained. So maybe he got fixated on women's shoes because it represents that happier moment in his life when his family was together. Because as you can see later on, he's having a bit of a difficult time. His mother is never at the house. His brother is about to move out because he has his girlfriend. He's going to make his life outside. And he has to work part-time to get more money for the supplies to create shoes. He keeps skipping school. He's kind of like he's not comfortable in that environment, and because of that, the funny thing is that actually there's this teacher that tells him that I have called you here, right? Like he's going to like what would you say? Well, tell him to pay attention, to not to skip school. That he's going to fail because of that. But that teacher is actually the ex-boyfriend of Yukino, and once they are still in friendly terms, even though they are exes. So when they are talking on the phone, this teacher actually tells her, "Oh, and you've been really happy lately. I'm so glad. What has been happening in your life, or something like that?" And she's actually telling him that she has met an old lady at the park, but it's not an old lady, it's this younger guy, the protagonist, Takao. And he's like, oh, I'm so glad you met this person, because now you seem a bit happier and you're actually enjoying things again. Because as I was telling you, she couldn't taste chocolate, and now she's getting that flavor back into her mouth. And Takao actually cooks some lunches, and he takes them to her because she's eating horribly, quite unhealthily. And they start sharing some small pleasant moments. She never tells him anything about her own life, just very few things. And there is a particular encounter that seems a bit like those scenes in film where they try to disguise a sexual encounter through some other thing. Like, I forget that movie, where a very old movie with Scarlett Johansson when she was really young, when she's kind of like a maid but also a model for this famous painter. I forget his name. And there is a scene where he's actually telling her to wet her lip and bite it, and it seems really sexual while he's painting her. So here there is a similar scene when he's actually telling her that he wants to make a living as a shoe designer, and he's having trouble designing shoes for women. So he basically invites her to be her foot model. So he basically, like, she steps on the bench, and he starts taking measurements, but it seems like a very subtle sexual scene. and she's also telling him like she's trying to learn to walk again because she feels like she's not wiser. Even though she's 27, she still feels a bit like a teenager. She doesn't know what to do. The story keeps moving forward, and something that I really like of The Garden of Words is that in many more artsy type of films or animations, sometimes they don't handle the passage of time quite well. They kind of show you a lot of what we consider at times unnecessary details. I know they do it for the immersiveness to make it feel like you're actually there, but here they have a very small and subtle musical montage of sorts. Not in the Rocky style of things, but like they had like a little medley or bridge of sorts, and you see different like mini scenes of things that have happened in the series. You see him working in this very small house, and you see her in her apartment feeling quite lonely. And it is evident that they look forward to the rain, because the rain serves as an excuse for them to meet in that place in like their own secret garden without being too open about their feelings for each other. And so, as I was telling you, the rain almost represents like a source of bliss and joy instead of just being a depressive element. And I actually enjoy rain quite a bit, but maybe that's because I live in Mexico and it's really hot here, so it doesn't rain as often, but every time it rains or it snows, I'm like, yes! So, and there is this moment where she's actually feeling really lonely, and she talks to her ex every now and then, but he's obviously now is going out with someone else. Probably it's getting quite serious, and you actually see him with his new girlfriend in his apartment, and he's actually kind to Yukino in their phone conversations, but sometimes she thinks, why weren't you so kind to me when we were going out? Because it seems that when the whole ordeal with her, when they tried to create a very hostile environment towards her, that she's a cougar, she's a slut, and all of that, it seems like her boyfriend did not believe her, and that's the worst thing you can do to a victim. But well, I'm talking about real victims, because nowadays there are many people who pretend to be victims, but those that are real victims, if you do not listen to them, to their troubles, their problems and such, and you actually victimize them like, you're lying, you are this or that never happened to you, or that never happens. When you do that, you're pushing that person. And I think that's why there's so much violence in the world many times. And you can see this at school, with many school shootings and stabbings and suicides. So it's terrible. And at one point, Yukino and Takao will find each other at school, because she's actually filling the paperwork to stop working at that school, and she's going to move out of the city. So they see each other, and Takao, this is probably the only moment in the animation that where he feels a bit. It kind of feels like he's emotionally unstable, still quite mature, but you can see that he's unbalanced by finding out that she was a teacher at his school. So he starts talking with his friend, because he has a close friend, and he tells him that what happened with her, that they start spreading rumors that she's sort of like a perverted cougar who is going after young men and such, and he's like really angry. And this is where a man really has to control himself, because if you do not have control over your own emotions, you can do some pretty drastic things, and you could end up perhaps in jail, or perhaps even killed if you're not intelligent. So you really have to watch out for yourself and take care of your own life. So he basically is asking around, who did this, who was the bitch that did this to Yukino, and he finds out, and he goes into a classroom with a bunch of upperclassmen or older students, and he kind of like he tells her that, are you the girl who has been saying this about Yukino? And she starts insulting Yukino and telling him that, you fell for that old hag or something. So he gets really mad, and he actually hits the girl, and she is accompanied by this really like somewhat massive, thuggish type of guy. He doesn't even study there. He's dressed like some sort of bum, and he beats Takao quite bad because it's obvious that Takao sucks at fighting. He's not very good. I think that's quite important for all men to learn, at the very least, the basics of fighting, because if you are a real man, you will need it. It sounds a bit, what would you say, close-minded perhaps, but you would be surprised when you're actually going to need to protect yourself or others physically, or perhaps even yeah. And so he gets into this fight trying to protect Yukino. You can see that he's a lot more mature and has stronger feelings for her than her boyfriend, who I'm not saying that her ex-boyfriend should have beat the crap out of those evil students, but at the very least he should have been there for her and he should have believed her. So you can see how Takao is much more of a man. Eventually it starts to rain again, and you can see that longing for each other, because when it's not raining, when it's actually quite sunny, they don't have like the courage to go to that place and meet with each other. Maybe things could have been even better if they were more honest about their feelings and met at that place even though it wasn't raining, because for example Yukino actually did that. She was actually getting really sad and she actually went in a sunny morning to that place, but of course he was not there, and to add insult to injury, you could see a very happy couple there and kind of smiling, having a good time. So she actually put a bit of her effort to looking for him. So when it actually rains again, they have an excuse to meet once more. And they meet up, and she notices that he is quite hurt, and he kind of like brushes it off, and he doesn't tell her like, "Oh, I fought for you," but he kind of like gives some very ambiguous roundabout way of, "Oh no, well I got into a fight," but he never tells him, and it seems like at that time she doesn't quite get what happened. It starts to rain really hard. Again, the rain comes as a sort of like a source of salvation, perhaps, in their romance, to the point that it gets them really wet. Even though they have their umbrellas, it's a powerful storm, and they get all wet. So she invites him to her place, and she allows him to change his clothes. Maybe she had some clothes from her ex-boyfriend there, and they almost look like a couple, and they actually like they're having, I think, breakfast together, and they are laughing and drinking coffee, and they're having just bliss. And then each of them thinks something like, "Oh, this is the happiest moment in my life." And so he actually takes courage and he tells her something like, I've fallen for you, Yukino," or something like that. But she, perhaps because she is thinking about his future, she thinks that she thinks that she is too old for him, and it's going to be more like a bad thing for him. But again, you can see how society gets in the way. There is really no, if there's actually true love within certain limits. Of course, I am talking about things in a more rational way, but if there's love, you should go for it no matter what society says. And so she tries to cut that off to stop that romance from developing further. She tells him, "Oh no, you should call me Miss Yukino. You see, I was actually having a really rough time. I didn't know how to walk anymore," against that symbolism of shoes and walking and women's feet and such. And she tells him, "But I want to thank you for everything that you have done." It's like very almost business-like, and that's really fatal. You can see this. There are many subtle symbolisms in the original video animation, because they are having coffee or tea, maybe, I'm not sure, and you can see that all of that warmth projected through the steam of the cups, it kind of like goes down. There is no more steam, no more heat, no more passion. Like she kind of cuts it off terribly, and so he gets, you can see that he's about to break down, you could say. So he changes back and he thanks her again, and he leaves the apartment, and they are both like you cannot tell what is happening to him because he already left the apartment, but you can see that she's in a crucial moment, and I think she makes the right choice. And of course, this is a love story. There has to be some sort of like a chase. So she runs out of the apartment, and I want to keep things here and not to spoil this climactic moment because I think this closes the story quite brilliantly, considering all things that have happened. But you see her running towards him, and they start to. Well, I'm going to spoil it a bit more, just a bit. Uh, she basically like catches up to him, and he turns around, and he basically tells her that you know I was wrong. I actually hate you. You were just using me. Just you were going through that rough time in your life, and you just kept using me. And I can tell that you lived like that all your life, always living on your own and not trying to rely on someone else and not accepting the feelings. And he kind of like bends out on her because of all the things that have happened. But this is the crucial moment when you can actually see them as man and woman, as she finally like jumps desperately into his arms, and they exchange some very powerful things, and they recognize or they accept the feelings for one another. And they acknowledge that, because that's the most important thing. I think that what is most hurtful in romance is when the other person does not acknowledge the feelings that you had for her, or for him, or for, in the case of men or women. And so it's a very powerful scene, and I'm not going to spoil the rest of the story, but although there are some ambiguous details in the ending, I think that it's still quite a hopeful story. As I was telling you, it kind of feels like each drop of rain, it's a glimmer of hope. So he actually, there's actually like a message that you can always keep going forward, keep walking, even though you find all those hardships, you can still find a way. And even though they tell you that some things are not possible, you should still try it. So let's close this video with what I think of the story. There is actually, I'm not sure in which interview, but they asked Makoto Shinkai as to why he created such sad stories or with obstacles between lovers. And he said that he wanted to, I don't know the exact words that he used, but he wanted to give a message to younger people, to tell them to follow their hearts and try to work towards achieving that fulfillment, that love, because he thinks that a lot of people just let things go by, and there are many like unfulfilled love stories out there. So he's delivering this message so that young people can treasure those moments. Well, I love this story. I love The Garden of Words, but most of all because I had an eerily similar situation when I was much younger, and there was also a lot of rain. It was funny, and it wasn't a garden, but it was sort of like I guess you could call it a patio in a certain place. I don't want to give too much details because it's somewhat I'm a bit bashful about that, because well, you're really young, and you're a guy, and you start to think about the future. But sometimes there are guys who are a bit too mature, who find women at that age that to be a bit too superficial, or sometimes a bit airheaded at times. So when you start talking with women that are a bit older, you kind of like have that connection, that even though you could have what would you say, physical pleasure with women of your own age, that other area, it feels missing. So that's I think that's a very important thing in the life of every man or even woman, to find someone who fulfills you, who gives you pleasure both in the body and the spirit as well, or the mind. So I can definitely relate to Takao, and a very touching story overall with many powerful messages. And I think that you should definitely watch it. I consider it pretty much a masterpiece. Um, Prepare to feel quite emotional when you watch it. Well, it depends as to your how you view or acknowledge the existence of love and romance. But I found it really powerful, a very emotional message. Well, thanks for watching this video, for hearing my thoughts and opinions on the Garden of Words and some aspects of life in general. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.